I'll apologize up front if I have some brief coughing fits, because I was one of the unfortunate victims of this virus that's going around London. So I'm very happy to be out of London, not just because you can pick up everything on the tube traveling back and forth to work, but also because the people are so much nicer outside of London, aren't they? I'll start off with a personal story. I think back to a story that my parents tell me, and aunts and uncles, about when my parents met as 15-year-olds in Detroit. And there's a famous street in Detroit called Gratiot, and people still today cruise Gratiot for hours and hours and hours, usually in the evening hours, to meet one another. And people set up kind of camp along the street, off the road, and watch people just driving and meeting and etc. And it's quite a community affair. Very stereotypically kind of 50s Americana, and everyone's got their souped-up Novas, Chargers, Cadillacs, you name it. So my parents met while cruising when they were 15, and dated for a couple of years when they were in high school, and then later decided to get to know each other in the biblical sense. And as a result of that high school union, I came into the world. And so I like to think of that, and they affectionately refer to it as a happy accident. And so it's been a common theme in my life to think about, what are the things that we plan for, and what are the things that are unplanned. And oftentimes it's the things that are unplanned that are most exciting, or can really fundamentally change the way that we see the world, the way that we participate in the world. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about what I refer to as strategic serendipity. So it's the convergence and divergence of where our strategies or our plans coincide with the things that we discover along the way, and how we adapt to those changes or those discoveries. So if we think about where serendipity itself comes from, it's really the effect by which one accidentally discovers something fortunate, especially while looking at something else entirely. You've got your eyes set on something else, and you discover something that you're actually quite chuffed about. The word derives from an old Persian fairy tale and was coined by Horace Walpole on the 28th of January, 1754, in a letter he wrote to his friend Horace Mann, who was then living in Florence. The letter read, "I once read in a fairy tale called The Three Princes of Serendip. As their highness traveled, they were constantly making discoveries by accident and sagacity of things that they were not in quest of. For instance, one of them discovered that a mule, blind of the right eye, had traveled the same road lately, because the grass was eaten on the left side, where it was worse for right. Now, do you understand serendipity?" Now, first of all, I find it astonishing that such a boring fairy tale existed at that stage, but also that coming out of that story, serendipity arose in something which I think, particularly for our industry, is very germane, has a great deal of impact in terms of how we see the internet and technology evolve, and also how we adapt to those changes. So out of that correspondence, our present-day understanding allegedly arose in terms of serendipity. And serendipity slowly emerged, and those accidental discoveries have led to what I consider intellectual leaps of understanding. And this applies to many, many different industries, and some of us will be familiar with some of the more obvious examples and maybe not so aware of some of the others. With this in mind, I think we think about serendipity in relation to science, for example, where some of the more obvious examples come from. The volume of contributions in terms of serendipitous discoveries varies extensively among scientific disciplines. Pharmacology, I think chemistry are two of the most obvious areas. Serendipity, I think, plays an important role in many fundamental scientific discoveries, from Archimedes' flash of inspiration while getting into the tub. See, it can happen at any moment. And also Newton's moment of clarity while sitting under the apple tree. Some happy accidents ended up curing diseases and extending lifespan of mankind. And we can probably argue till the cows come home whether or not that's a good thing, but certainly major advances. For example, Alexander Fleming hadn't been so eager to rush off on his holidays, which I think many of us are often guilty of. He would have remembered to disinfect the petri dishes containing bacteria that he was experimenting on. When he returned, he found in his lab that the dishes that were contaminated with mold essentially gave us the early signs of what later became penicillin, purely accidental. There are, I think, several things in our daily lives that we use, and again, arguably, you can talk about the extent to which these are vital contributions, but they're certainly part of our everyday lives. Cellophane is a good example. I think the most popular clear plastic wrapper was developed in 1908 by a Swiss chemist as a material for covering stain-proof tablecloth. Teflon arose when a chemist tried to develop a new gas for refrigeration and got the slick substance instead, and that was used primarily in mechanics to grease the wheels, so to speak. And one of my favorites, silly putty, was invented on the way to solving another problem, which was finding a substitute for the United States. The United States were working to find a substitute for rubber during World War II, and instead found something fun for us to play with for many hours. I think probably many of you will be familiar with the 3M example, where one of the inventors there was trying to essentially create a strong adhesive, possibly one of the strongest adhesives, and instead found an adhesive that never actually dried and was very, very loose. So Post-it notes came to our everyday existence, and I don't know if you're anything like me, but whenever I storyboard, I've got hundreds of them all over, and I don't know what I would do without them. So, and now we've got a lot of different electronic versions of that with Backpack and a number of different applications, which I think are fantastic. So if those are examples of serendipity or happy accidents, something that we discover while we're actually looking for something else, then the question arises, what is strategic serendipity? Some of us work for companies that have very large strategy departments. Some of us like to consider ourselves visionaries or strategists by nature. So where really does that convergence and divergence occur, where you start to see innovation come out of something where you've got a plan that lies in a very different way? In a sense, strategic serendipity is what happens, like in 3M and Post-it notes, when you not only analyze the accident, but you start to adapt your entire strategy to use as the advantage whatever accident occurred. But it's really that analysis and that understanding and how you apply that understanding which starts to formulate an entirely new strategy. It's really about the assumptions that we make about our lives, about the users, about the way that we work, and those assumptions are obviously driven by the questions that we ask. In the area in which I think most of us in here work, it's moving very, very quickly and always in a state of flux. Serendipity not arises necessarily from the fungus in the petri dish, but what I think is the main driver, and that being the core of human behavior, how people behave. I sometimes wish that I had studied psychology. I think those of you who did are definitely advanced in terms of understanding some of the things that are happening right now across the industry.